thank you all. It's really hard to get people sort of focused and concentrating again after afternoon tea, but we're going to liven things up. For those of you who don't know me, and I've managed to talk to most of you today, my name's Nitha Palakshappa, so I've been sort of second half of the project lead on this project with Kelly and the rest of the project team. And it's sort of it's great to be at this point, you know, towards the end of the day, where we've had a fantastic sort of run-up of speakers, you know, people looking at the food and fibre issues very broadly, but also people who have really given us a focus of what's happened in their organisations and their specific industry. So I think it's been brought together really well. And I think what we'd like to do now in this session is go out broad again. What I'm going to do is start by asking our three speakers. So we've got Jay, who started us off, and we've got Stephen, and we've got Kelly, who are all going to give us about 5 minutes of reflection on their thoughts, what we've achieved today, and bearing in mind that what our own brief started with was looking at what's next for measuring circular economy in Aotearoa New Zealand. So we're sort of going full circle, and I sort of don't like to use that anymore. I want to use spiral, I want to use tornado, all these other things that have sort of popped up seem so much more powerful, really. So let's see what our three speakers have to say very briefly, and then we're going to open it up for everyone to sort of make comments, ask questions. We want to encourage a bit more discussion on sort of your own perhaps perspective on barriers, challenges in terms of measuring circular economy. Jay.
Ooh, where to start? I'm not one of these organised people who wrote notes, so I'm going to start real broad. I think, the idea of a circular economy for me is just the root of all tribal thinking in New Zealand, and I will speak from a Te Ao Māori perspective of interrelationships, of whakapapa, that everything is connected to everything else. I guess you can draw that as a circle or a web. I remember I saw a Buddhist illustration of it once as a spider web with dewdrops, where every drop reflected every other dewdrop. And I think, a circle might be a bit simple. I think it's far more complex than a circle. And that's always been the measurement challenge. I remember early in sustainability, where we thought, right, let's connect up all the different indicator frameworks so we can measure just with one set of indicators and report to every framework in the world. And that was a brilliant idea until we tried to do it and realized that there is just so many interconnections that you can only ever approximate a measurement. You can never actually measure sustainability. You can measure trends on a single metric, but you can't claim anything really beyond that. So yeah, I think, and thinking about a circular economy, it's helpful to think about interrelationships between things. Going back to one of my favorites, Alan Watts again, he said, you don't walk by dangling your feet in the air. It's always an interaction between you and something. You can't know left without right. Like, everything is interaction and relationship. In economics, when economics first tried to address sustainability, they came up with the idea of the capitals approach. And the capitals approach initially, which is now known as weak sustainability, had that idea that any capital can be substituted for any other capital. So you can take natural capital, you can take a forest, you can cut that down, you can process it, turn it into financial and produce capital, and it balances. And obviously that was pretty wrong, because it doesn't regenerate in the speed that would require. So yeah, I think, my idea in the circular economy space is that anything where we try to draw a diagram and we try to reduce things to a simple image of how a system works, it's wrong, and it may be helpful, but it's wrong. And so, it's always for me been about not being too fundamentalist, accepting the gooey wiggliness of systems and to work within them. I think the hardest transition for me coming out of academia and into consulting was being okay with not working to a gold standard when reporting information, to say, this is good enough. It's not perfect, but it helps get the point across. It helps progress things. A lot of what held us up on the New Zealand Sustainability Dashboard is that we wanted the gold standard, and because we couldn't get that, we achieved nothing because an incremental improvement wasn't seen as good enough. So, yeah, there's a very broad ramble on.
I think we'd probably agree with you, especially in the last part. Sometimes when you want change, you're trying to look for the large change or the ultimate goal. And even in academia, that's becoming an impossibility. We're looking at incremental change, even in terms of the research that we're sort of shifting out into industry. So totally agree with you there. And I think picking up on the relationships, I think, was really important as well. Thank you. Stephen?
Thanks very much. I feel like I want to pick up on some things that Jay emphasized in his talk about why measure in the first place, and what emerged for me, particularly that slide of the finger pointing at the moon, is that it's a pragmatic or practical exercise. It's not the end or value in itself. It's pointing to what is valuable. And I guess I want to connect that to what I heard across all the talks about the food and fiber. And one theme that seemed to run through it, unsurprisingly, was money, and specifically capitalization, and how do we make things happen. And so the practical aim of measurement then is in part to give you credibility, saying, look, this could work, right? And that's broadly construed sort of the concept of social license. And I guess for me, that got me thinking about, well, who's investing into what end? So if we wanted to, say, relocalize food and fiber production in this society, where would the capital come from? And that makes me think about history, and in particular, a book called Cooperative Enterprise and Comparative Perspective by a guy named Jason Spicer, who's a big thinker in the social and solidarity economy space. The book was sort of a mystery as a history. And the mystery was, why have co-ops not taken off in my home country of the United States? And there's all kinds of reasons, mostly having to do with politics and the Pinkertons and repression and violence and all that kind of stuff. But what he compared it to was Finland, where cooperatives are a big part of the economy, and Scandinavia more broadly. He looked at France, where they have a long history of the social and solidarity economy that goes back centuries. And then the third country he looked at was, New Zealand. That's right, which on a per capita basis had more co-ops than anywhere else. And a lot of that was actually a function of geography, that kind of, again, mutuality at the point of finance is a part of the history. So I just wonder if there's a way in which that history could be returned to or reinvented. Is there a kind of Trans-Tasman version of cooperation amongst cooperatives that might allow us to really think about how could we capitalize research? How could we solve that problem of using tannins to color things, or the possum example that was just so intriguing for me, partially because I didn't understand it all that much, but I could see that it was sort of trying to line up multiple values, and it would be worth investing in. And wouldn't it be great if there was a vehicle for doing that? That's one thought that I had. And then I guess the other thought I had was that there are things that are being unmade, both here in New Zealand and in Australia, and it's the university sector I'm thinking of in particular. So several of us have read this article recently, which was, the title of it is Repurposing the University in Times of Climate Breakdown, by a First Nations thinker from Brazil named Vanessa Andrade. And essentially what she's saying is that the university sector is falling apart, but as it falls over, it might function like what she called a nurse log, which is a metaphor from tropical countries, where as that institution breaks down, all of the nutrients in it sort of go off and seed into other entities and organizational form. So this is a long-winded way of saying, and I'm thinking of several of my colleagues here who are really taking serious this idea of what if we form partnerships between academic research and local enterprise or different kinds of commercialization, including cooperatives. Could we reinvent that partnership model? What would that look like? How could we share revenues? How could we basically transition the university into something else, in which case it becomes a nurse log? And then lastly, just one more point, if I got the time. Is that okay? I was thinking about the thing about food security. I can't quite remember who was presenting on it. Local food production. Can anyone help me out? Emily, yeah. And sort of the question of broccoli. What was coming to mind for me... Broccoli, yes. Well, what was coming to mind for me was, this is going back a ways, the city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this example, but it was an attempt by the local municipality to essentially wholly subsidize the production of nutritious food for the local community. So that idea of sort of relocalization with an aim towards decommodification underwrites the livelihood for the farmers and deals with the problem of food insecurity in the local community. And I guess I'm just thinking of it because I just sat through a whole heap of student presentations in Australia about different regions in New South Wales. And the threat assessment coming from the state government is that food insecurity, along with housing insecurity, is in every part of Australia at this point. So I mean, for me, it's a live question. And as some of those other contradictions we were seeing get more pronounced, I think it's going to be one that we're going to have to solve on a local level. The inevitability of degrowth that our first speaker referred to. Anyways, that's enough from me. Here you go.
Thank you. Kelly?
I thought you were just going to say everything that I wanted to say and steal my notes, but you started. But I also have some extra things. But it is echoing what Stephen said. But yeah, I guess reflecting on the theme of measuring circular economy or spiral economy or taututu, I was thinking there's kind of two themes of measuring that have come through. One is the measuring as a language or as a way of communicating, mainly externally. What you already know is great, and then the other one is this sort of internal tracking of data, like partly what Jacob was talking about, and some other people have mentioned, how we don't have data on this, or we've weighed everything on this, or we've tracked, a lot of different textiles. The use of internal measuring that's for your own learning. And then Jay's reflection on how there's the one technical report and the multiple reports that come out of it. I like that approach because there is something behind it, the technical report, and then it is about the communication. But sometimes I worry what happens is that it's the lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? That we start to use measurement as a way of propaganda, as Jacob talked about, as a way of kind of convincing ourselves that we're doing something even when it's not enough. So I kind of was reflecting on, honest measurement, and although it's never going to be the full picture, it's always just pointing at the moon. Like, how can we hold it with sort of honesty and humility and not fudge it, but also recognise its limitations? It's a language and a tool, and then it's also an internal tracking thing to help us learn and reflect on our own practices and our own decisions as a business or as a university or as a community enterprise. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about measurement. And then in terms of what next, I had 3 points. One, it was so great to listen to the research needs and the research ideas that the industry speakers have brought up. And I was thinking about, the university as well, as a site of potentially escalating networks of reciprocity and care, and how, the falling over of the tree can nurse many other things. But also just, this is what we're funded for. This is why universities are partly government funded. It's because it is our job, as Abby said today, to take some of that risk, to do some of the testing, to do the experiment in a, out of curiosity and a desire to learn, and to share that back with the country who funds us. And so I think, sometimes we lose track of that. We're like, oh, students need a degree, they should pay for it. Or, we should get more research consulting contracts and deliver things for external partners. But also, one of the benefits of having, regular funding is that ability to absorb, some of the risk and to be a site of experimentation and learning. So my second thought about that, and there's a few people in the room that have helped me think about this, is we've put in an early notification for a Masters of Circular Economies run through Massey University. And one of the things I'm really excited about, it's proposed to be transdisciplinary between sort of economic geography and business, a policy and society stream, Sarah here in the life cycle analysis and engineering, and Faith and Angela in circular design, that students could pick these specialisations but also have to take a course from one of the other specialisations, so they learn about the connections between life cycle analysis and economic policy, for example. And the design that we went with in the proposal is to have, rather than a thesis, have a practicum, where the students take what they've learned and work in a community organisation or a business or a government, local government or something, to kind of do some of those things that you've identified as research needs. Because the other difficulty for us is that, if we apply for funding to do research, we have to show how it's new and it's interesting and it's more than what anyone else has ever done before and it's going to be the best thing ever. But actually some of the research needs are quite basic. It's collecting data. It's not a new method. It's not a new thing. And, we can't get competitive research funding to just do something basic. It has to be new and exciting. But students can do that. And that's how they learn. And that's an excellent way for students to learn, is to answer some of those basic research questions with and for community groups. So I was thinking a little bit along the same lines as you, that what are the ways that universities can participate in transition that are not just writing journal articles and critiquing what other people are doing. Yeah, that's where I was thinking. And then the last thought was this idea that we've been circling around for a few years, some of us, of a circular economy return on investment as a way of helping. We're not sure what it should be. Should it be for helping businesses make decisions about where to invest their own kind of surplus from with it that they've generated within the business? What would help? What would have the most impact in terms of circularity? Or should it be something that communicates externally to show here's what our circular economy return on investment is, so you should invest in us? So that's kind of what I'm playing with at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, just summarising a lot of what's been said, there are aspects that we need to consider in terms of collaboration, how we collaborate, who we collaborate with, and trying to sustain those collaborations to a point where you actually sort of get to wherever that finger is pointing. Mm-hmm. You might not get to the moon, but get as far as you can in terms of moving things forward. And I think from my own perspective, if we want to create shifts, it's going to require collaboration, holistic thinking, from a multidisciplinary perspective, and a lot of people sitting around the table. And I guess that's sort of part of what we've been trying to work towards, and hopefully we'll sort of continue to work in that way. So I guess we've got time now for a few questions, or if you want to get up and make a comment, your own reflection on the day, or how you see it impacting your own work or your own business, feel free. Any questions for any of the panel or anyone else? Now's the time to speak up.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to kind of look at that term circular economy a bit. And when you look at what's happened under the kind of heading of circular economy, and if you say it to someone, what they tend to do is jump to the word recycling. So we look at all the waste being generated, what can we do with it? But actually, if you looked at it using an environmental sustainability lens, actually what we need to be doing is going back to the initial extraction and use of resources to meet people's needs and wants, and addressing that. Because if you only focus on the end of the life cycle, then you can carry on producing more and more up front. And people don't talk about that, but that's the really difficult bit to address, because it means these extractive industries are going to shrink, ideally. Yeah, it's about terminology and what you choose to measure, right? Yeah. And I think we need to put a lot more emphasis on the kind of underlying drivers that determine where we should be measuring, at the end of the life or at the beginning of the life.
Yep. Okay. So that takes us right from production through to consumption. And I think consumption itself creates so many issues, you know. I think today some people talked about changing consumer behaviour, and that's one of the things, even as a basic consumer, I might think it's all about recycling, but it's so much more than that. And trying to expand mindset is a huge issue that we have to deal with as well at that point. Do you have any comments on what Sarah, right? Sarah's brought up. Can you share this?
All right. If all you've got is a dump truck, then everything looks like a payload, right? So I know, that problem of what to measure and when to measure it. So that in that measuring the value of reuse project I spoke about at the beginning of the day, we were trying to imbue that sector, sort of extending product life cycle with all of its carbon implications and other implications. That's something else that we can produce a whole new range of measures for, that then end up, I think, in a sense, really validating that as something that's more important than recycling in terms of achieving circularity. The question I think you're talking about, which is at the point of extraction and production, that's something that Nina Gabor talks a lot about from the Australia Institute, where she's really trying to challenge fast fashion's hegemony. And for me, one of the things that's really interesting about her work is she's trying to change the regime of desire that surrounds clothing to make reuse into something that becomes storied and celebratory and meaningful. And she does it through holding parties. So, I'm wondering, or I'm just being provocative here, but what role might pleasure play in changing the way we relate to consumption, and what else can we do that might be pleasurable? So alternative hedonics is another term for it.
Or not just pleasure, but also other imbued meanings. So I'm thinking of what Adrian said about designing the kākahu toitu, the forever cloak. And, a kākahu that's handed down for a long time is definitely more desirable than one you got from a tourist shop, the meaning accumulates, right? The value accumulates over time. And and what Koto is doing, and I don't know where Tessa is, but that trying to think about those pieces as things that are desirable, but also they accumulate meaning and stories. Yeah, I think it really shows the connections between trying to do all of the science work that people are doing here, and then all of the the embodied habits and social science stuff that's part of that. So, interesting.
I just had a comment around the value of unpaid labour and volunteers, and I had an amazing conversation, I'm not sure where she is, around just the time it takes to actually get textiles, as an example, back out to be reused when they're damaged or, destined for landfill, essentially, when they're donated. And just that grassroots stuff that doesn't end up being measured. We all know that clothes swaps happen, but no, it's not going to end up somewhere being measured as a way that people have reduced their consumption. I was part of organising a pop-up for our local community in Pukeroa Bay, and there was a clothes swap that was very well attended. I don't know how much transacted, and then it was, if anything left was donated to the local charity shop. But it's those things are not regularly picked up on unless, academics, I have to say, are probably writing about it. So maybe there's a call there to make some of these things more visible.
Stephen, do you want to comment on some of the research that you've
Yeah,
done?
well,
Speaks exactly
I guess I'd refer you to my colleague Jenna Condi and Alison Gill, who just organized a swap on our campus with 40,000 students. Not all of them showed up for the swap, by the way. But what we did was we weighed the material as it went in. We had a whole host of other kinds of reuse and repair activities that, again, about changing the regime of desire. And then the other thing that they did was they had these sort of giant swing tags, and people would write in neon markers like, this is why I donated this garment, and here's its history, much like you were saying. And then the person on the flip side would write, here's what it meant for me to get it, including like, I needed professional clothing, I now have it. So for me, it's solving another problem at the university, which is that students don't show up anymore, and it's driving me nuts. So on some level, again, think nurse log. Can we take these massive spaces and really turn them into really, areas of connection, not just with students, but with the broader community? And then to me, like the measurement can follow from that, but in a sense, there's another thing happening, which is a demonstration of what it's like to build relationships, and we've got a lot to learn from there.
I was going to add, thank you, I was going to add to, is it Sarah's comment about that recycling and how it makes the wheel tune faster. And this is something we've talked about a lot. And Hannah, I don't know if she's still here, introduced us to the concept of that Jevons paradox, where, when the system becomes more efficient, it spins faster. And the comment about that emotional connectivity to what you wear is really, really valid. But there's this whole other side of the textile sector that isn't our clothing, that's like you're not going to get emotionally connected to the hospital sheets that you're lying on, or the curtains in the hotel or whatever. And so there's there are different cycles through that textile sector, and we're so aware of clothing because that's what we immediately interact with every day, and that's where all the activism. But there's actually, through the commercial sector, the hotels, retirement homes, hospitals, there's this massive flow of resources through that has a different cadence and a different purpose. And anyway, that's what I want to raise.
Now,
He's just holding the mic.
Just hoping Jay
I'll take it off. I'll carry the load.
This has been great. I guess I've got two questions. One is around, it's great to measure things, but when I look at like why I sit in rooms like this, it's because I want my great-grandchildren to be able to swim in the ocean. And so like question one is kind of, how do we make sure we have the measurement and data right, but we also help people think about the world they'll leave behind? So that's question one. Question two is around like legislation. And when I worked at Red Cross, they did the Uber clothing drive, and they thought they would get 6,000 kgs of clothing, and they got 56,000 kgs of clothing in a weekend. And if you went to the Dominion Road shop, the volunteers were just so overwhelmed. And what I found really interesting is that nowhere on the charity balance sheets is there a line item for how much they spend sending things to landfill. And so I would love to know if there's like legislative opportunities where we don't want to discourage people from sending textiles to op shops, but then there's this little bit of a pat on the back, like I did really well, like I cleared out my wardrobe this weekend and now I'm going to go shopping and get some new stuff. So I guess that's my second question.
Do any of you want to take that up, or is there an aspect that you'd like to speak to?
Some comments on measurement, because I think you can measure anything. Better or worse, like the types of measurements. And what we've always struggled with in measuring stuff is not the measurement, but the reference value, which is a bit of a sciencey term, but, you know, what do you measure? What are you comparing that measurement against? And this is a big problem in social return on investment. So, you know, I measure the improvement in mental health from a talking therapy session. And, you know, I can say, that improved at 10%. There's a quality of life adjusted years value I can attribute to that. I can put a number to it. But we're not comparing that to anything. Like, what is the actual gold standard for an increase in that? Is it 10%? Is it 40? I have no idea. And we really struggle with this in sustainability a lot. It's like there's so many different types of reference values. You can have a benchmark. Often it's set really low. You could have a comparative benchmark, the industry average. You could have an absolute target, so many, you know, micrograms of nitrates per hectare or something. You can have the ratios, the intervals. There's so many, and it's always the forgotten part. So measuring stuff's great when you're measuring it in comparison to something else, so you can see if you're doing well or you're progressing, or, you know, at the very least you're doing it over time. Yeah, the bit about, like, you know, measuring is not going to leave the world a better place for your kids. I mean, what I see that motivates people to leave the world a better place, the strongest thing I see is a collective mindset or a community mindset. And the reason why so many, like, say, Māori farms outperform on sustainability is because they're responsible to a much bigger community around them. They're not responsible to just their shareholders or just the family. They're responsible to this, you know, even if it's a small family farm, there's still the layers of cousins and whānau around it that they're responsible for. So, you know, that's the only path I've seen is broadening away from an individualistic view of just my family unit to a broader view. And how do you transition a Western individualistic society to that? And
Well,
no,
going to be my question. Anyone wants to
no idea.
I'm not gonna answer it all, but I was just reflecting as you were speaking, Jay, and with your question, Kirsten, about student grades. And we run a course that's about community engagement, and you have to show up to give your presentation back to the community at the end. And you have to show up for all your classmates' presentations as part of that. And I put that expectation out very clearly. My colleague April and myself spent a lot of time communicating that throughout the whole semester. And then the last thing, a student didn't come. They came to their presentation, but they didn't come to the rest. And then I got this panicked email. How many marks will I lose because I didn't come to my classmate's presentation? And I said, none, but I'm really disappointed in you. And he's like, but how many do I lose? And he couldn't, it was so strange. I was like, I'm not going to actually take marks off for that because you did give your presentation, but it was like that the learning outcome was showing up, and I'm disappointed that you didn't get that. And it was almost like that hurt more in a sense, but he also couldn't quite understand it. He couldn't quite, because he's like, well, if you care, then why didn't you take marks off? And then I was like, well, measurement isn't the point. The point is that you become an ethical person that shows up, and you didn't. And that's kind of on you, you know. Yeah, so I do think it's ingrained. So, and we do that to our children through these kinds of education systems that rank and measure. You know, and we do that to our students. And we've all been taught, if we've been taught to teach, which not all academics have, is that, you know, if you want them to do something, you have to attach grades to it. But what have we done by doing that? We've reduced, you know, quite a lot of student political activism that you would see in the 90s, where you kind of had one exam at the end of the class, was enabled because you weren't spending all this time trying to meet the the grade requirements of all the different assignments that you had. So yeah, I mean, kind of from my industry, thinking about some of the downside of measurement is how do you hold both of those together? Like, I want you to be an ethical person, but I can't really put a number on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we talk about when we're talking about sustainability, or we talk about aspects of circularity, you know, embedding that right at the heart of the enterprise is so crucial. But when we talk about responsibility as an individual, I feel like sometimes what are we doing in terms of encouraging a person to be responsible for their consumption, and how can we actually work towards encouraging more of that, you know, I think is really important. The second aspect of your
Oh, sorry, I was so greedy. I was like, I've got the mic, I'm going to give it the mic.
I was actually wondering whether Bernadette could answer it, but I think she slipped outside, so maybe we'll come back to that. Are there any other comments or questions that? Yep.
I have one on that concept of reference values. It's a comment, maybe a question, but on that concept of reference values and the subjectivity of it, and how you it's almost you reference quantum mechanics, and if anyone's ever read a book called The Dancing Woolly Masters, it's a lovely introduction to quantum mechanics and how the very act of observing something is subjective and changes the value of that thing. And so how we choose to measure and value things is reflective of our society, and is reflective of our culture and what we as this community value. So it's really hard to sort of start to disentangle the subjective measurements and reference values from what society asks for. And so trying to, so I don't even know where I'm going with this, but it's really hard to change the system.
I think that's worthy of a comment. Do any of you want to comment on that?
Someone else was going to comment on it.
Okay.
Yeah, get a few.
Oh, it was kind of related but slightly different, so please. Yeah?
No, that gives us time to think.
I was just thinking about sort of different knowledge types and measuring, and sometimes, although measurement, it could be a useful way of communicating, I wonder sometimes whether it creates a distance, and thinking a lot of the things that we've been talking about today are very material. They have very material lives. And I was thinking about this messiness, and like when you know that the milk is off, you have a very visceral reaction. And I was thinking about tamariki and younger generations, and actually how are there ways that we can also have experiences where we bring, for example, young people to the tips so that you actually see the consequences of our actions or inactions, so it's not so clean. Because I think sometimes when things are measured, it feels very clean and objectified and kind of discreet. And if you understand how to read those measurements, you understand the impact. But sometimes different communication methods might allow the impact or those measurements to be felt.
Yeah. I love that. I just went on a tip tour, Palmerston North. Highly recommend. You know, and they do take children. But it was what I really came away from it was the workers' job of sorting the recycling. And that's really visceral when you haven't cleaned it properly, or you've, you know, like watching them work was, you know, they become real. When I'm putting something in the recycling bin, that's the person that has to deal with me when I haven't done it correctly. So that was, yeah, I love that idea. I had a student who did she was developing climate indicators through visceral feel in Vietnam, and she interviewed farmers who could splash the water in the way that the light reflected off it. They could tell how saline it was and whether to close the sluice gate to the rice fields, and they could feel the soil and sort of tell from the texture of the soil what was missing. You know, and she kind of talked about those as climate change indicators, because over time their visceral kind of response to those things was changing and their observations were changing. So yeah, I love that idea. And I've forgotten what your question was that I asked for more time on, so I'll pass that on, but we're almost done.
I think you're all avoiding that wonderful comment that...
Is it Tammy?
Tammy, yeah.
Yeah, no, I can't.
I think I
answer
just
it.
agree. I agree with you, yeah.
I think it was a very, very deep comment that we're going to have to reflect on. Any final comments or questions? Because we are almost ready to wrap up. No? Well, I think on that note, we'll sort of wrap things up. Say thank you to our panel. And thank you all for the questions in this session. That was fantastic discussion. So on behalf of our project team, I'd like to say thank you all for making the time today. I think we've had 1 year of this where we got funded and we've been working with industry to sort of create these connections and get to the point where we are today. So, you know, it seems like it's a one-day effort, but actually we've been working behind the scenes for a long time. So we'd like to thank you all and all our industry partners and the relationships we've built with you for all the work that you've also put in to actually being here today. It's made our day a lot more fruitful, and let's hope that there are many ideas that we can sort of take forward and work with different people on in the room. So thank you all. I'd like to invite Sita up to sort of... Angela's going to close for us? Okay.
Kia ora. Just before I do the closing karakia, I was thinking of a whakatauki to share, just on our sort of closing comments there. E hara takutoa e te tō takatahi, engari he tō takitini. It's not my strength alone, but the strength of many, which I thought sort of captured what we're all saying. So here, karakia whakamutunga. Kia tau te manakitanga ki runga e tēnā o tātou, kia piki te ora, kia piki te māramatanga, kia hoki pai atu, kia hoki pai mai. Tūturu whakamaua kia tēnā, haumie, huie, tākie.
Thank you so much, Angela. And on that note, go safe, everyone. Have a lovely evening.